When the 8-year-old boy, hiding behind a rust-streaked dumpster that smelled of sour milk and rain, saw the biker, he knew he had one chance. He held up a small, grimy hand, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird, and made the signal he had invented in the dark. He prayed the man would understand. For the biker they called Coltrane, a man who had spent his life reading the signs of chaos and disaster, the boy's silent, desperate plea cut through the humid afternoon quiet like a siren. The sight of that small hand and the terror in those wide eyes set off a chain of events that would turn a routine rest stop at a forgotten roadside motel into a standoff between good and evil, proving that sometimes, a hero doesn't wear a cape, but worn leather and road dust. The Sleepy Hollow Motel was a place the world had forgotten. It squatted just off a 2-lane blacktop in the middle of nowhere, a relic of a time before interstate highways had rerouted the lifeblood of the country. Its sign, a cartoon moon with a sleeping cap, was peeling, one eye half-closed in a permanent, rusty wink. The paint on the dozen or so doors was the color of faded mint, flaking away to reveal the gray, weathered wood beneath. It was the kind of place people ended up, not the kind of place they chose. The air hung thick and still, heavy with the scent of pine needles and impending rain. Marcus Thorne, known to the Iron Sentinels Motorcycle Club as Coltrane, did not like the feel of the place. He had pulled his Harley-Davidson Road Glide into the U-shaped parking lot simply to stretch his legs and drink some water from the canteen strapped to his bag. At 52, the long rides took more of a toll than they used to. His back ached, a constant reminder of a collapsed roof and the life he used to live. Before the bike and the club, there had been 30 years with the fire department. 30 years of smoke, sirens, and the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from seeing people on the worst day of their lives. He was a big man, built like the brick firehouses he had once called home. A thick, graying beard covered the lower half of his face, and his eyes, shielded by sunglasses, were a pale, observant blue. They were eyes that had learned to see through smoke, to find the source of a fire, to spot the subtle tremor in a support beam just before it gave way. They were eyes that missed very little. His leather cut, the vest that served as his uniform, was adorned with the patches of his club and his service. An American flag, a POWEMIA symbol, and the roaring eagle of the Iron Sentinels. It was a map of his life, a declaration of his allegiances. He unscrewed the cap of his canteen and took a long drink, the water cool against his dry throat. He leaned against his bike, the chrome warm from the sun, and let his gaze drift across the desolate scene. A beat-up sedan with a mismatched fender was parked in front of room 7. The door to room 9 was ajar, a television flickering silently within. It was quiet. Too quiet. It was the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, but expectant. The silence before a storm, or before something terrible happened. That's when he saw him. A flicker of movement behind the large green dumpster at the far end of the lot. Coltrane's body tensed, a reaction honed by decades of responding to alarms. He didn't move his head, just his eyes. He saw a small, dark-haired boy, no older than 8 or 9, peeking around the edge. The boy's face was smudged with dirt, his eyes huge and dark in his pale face. He was wearing a t-shirt that was far too big for him, the cartoon character on the front faded and cracked. He saw the fear. That was the first thing that registered. It was a specific kind of fear, raw and undiluted. Coltrane had seen it 1,000 times. He'd seen it on the faces of children pulled from burning homes, their small bodies trembling with shock. He'd seen it on the faces of people trapped in the twisted metal of a car wreck. It was the look of an animal caught in a trap, a desperate, hopeless terror that went beyond simple fright. Then, a man came out of room 7. He was thin and wiry, with greasy hair and a nervous energy that radiated off him in waves. He wore a stained tank top and jeans. He looked around the parking lot, his eyes darting from the empty road to the silent motel rooms. He wasn't just looking, he was hunting. His posture was aggressive, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. He called out a name, his voice a harsh rasp that scraped the quiet air. "Leo! Stop messing around!" The boy behind the dumpster flinched violently and shrank back, trying to make himself smaller, invisible. But his eyes remained fixed on Cold Train. Cold Train didn't move a muscle. He remained leaning against his bike, the picture of a weary traveler taking a break. But inside, every one of his old instincts was screaming. The man's agitated demeanor, the boy's ragged clothes, the sheer, paralyzing fear on that small face. The pieces didn't fit. This wasn't a father annoyed with his son during a family road trip. This was something else. Something dark and ugly. He had learned a long time ago that the world was full of things that didn't fit. Things that looked normal on the surface but were deeply, fundamentally wrong underneath. He had learned that most people walked right past these things, their minds too busy, their eyes too distracted to see the cracks in the facade. But Cold Train had been trained to see the cracks. It was his job to look for the smoke, for the hairline fracture, for the subtle sign that everything was about to go horribly wrong. And this scene was filled with them. The boy wasn't just hiding, he was taking cover. The man wasn't just calling a name, he was issuing a threat. The entire tableau felt staged and wrong, like a play where all the actors had forgotten their lines and were improvising out of desperation. He watched as the man took a few angry steps towards the dumpster, his movements jerky and unpredictable. The boy pressed himself harder against the cold metal, his small body rigid with terror. His gaze, however, never left Cold Train. It was a lifeline, a desperate, silent plea cast across the cracked asphalt of the empty parking lot. In that moment, the boy's eyes locked with his. Cold Train gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. He didn't know what he was confirming, what promise he was making, but he knew he had to let the child know he was seen. He was not invisible. Not anymore. The boy seemed to understand. He took a shaky breath, and then he did it. He lifted his hand, the one Cold Train had seen before. It was a deliberate, calculated movement. He held up 2 fingers, a peace sign. Then, he brought the hand to his ear, tapping it once. Finally, he moved the hand to his chest, over his heart, and tapped twice, firmly. 2 fingers. Tap ear. Tap tap chest. It wasn't a signal Cold Train had ever seen before. It wasn't sign language. It wasn't a gang sign. It was a child's language, invented in a moment of pure desperation. But its meaning was as clear as a bell. 2 honks. Honk twice if you hear me. Honk twice if it's safe. The blood in Cold Train's veins turned to ice. The lazy heat of the afternoon vanished, replaced by a chilling, razor-sharp clarity. The quiet hum of the cicadas in the nearby trees faded away, and all he could hear was the frantic beating of his own heart. There was no more ambiguity. There was no more doubt. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a rescue. He thought of all the times he had been too late. The fires that had claimed too much before his engine arrived. The accidents where a few seconds might have made the difference. He had carried the weight of those moments for years, the ghosts of the people he could not save. He had retired from the department because that weight had become too heavy to bear. He had thought these days were behind him. He was wrong. The man was getting closer to the dumpster now, his voice rising in anger. "Leo, I swear, if you make me come get you." Cold Train pushed himself off his bike. The decision was made. It had been made the second he saw the boy's face, but the signal had sealed it in concrete. He might be wrong. This could all blow up in his face. He could be a middle-aged biker harassing a frustrated father. He could end up explaining himself to the police, embarrassed and ashamed. Or he could be the only person standing between that terrified little boy and a lifetime of horror. He looked at the 2 possibilities, weighing them in his mind. The risk of embarrassment versus the risk of a child's life. It wasn't a choice at all. He moved with a deliberate, unhurried grace that belied his size. He didn't want to spook the man, not yet. He swung his leg over the saddle of his bike, the worn leather of the seat creaking softly. He reached into the pocket of his vest and pulled out his phone. His fingers, thick and calloused, moved swiftly across the screen. He sent a message to the Iron Sentinels group chat. It was just 2 words and his GPS coordinates. Code 100. There would be no questions. No requests for details. His brothers knew what it meant. It meant a sentinel was in trouble and needed backup immediately. It meant drop everything and ride. He knew the closest members were probably 20 minutes out, but it was a start. He was on his own until then. He put the phone away and gripped the handlebars. He still hadn't started the engine. The sound would be an escalation, a declaration of intent. He wanted to control the timing. He pushed off with his feet, rolling the heavy machine forward, the tires crunching softly on the loose gravel at the edge of the asphalt. He maneuvered the bike until it sat broadside across the narrow entrance to the motel parking lot, completely blocking the only way in or out. It was a fortress of chrome and steel. His fortress. The man saw the movement. He stopped in his tracks, his head snapping towards Coltrane. His eyes, which had been filled with a predatory anger, now held a flicker of confusion and suspicion. "Hey! What do you think you're doing?" he shouted, his voice cracking with irritation. Coltrane didn't answer. He just sat there, astride his iron horse, a silent, immovable object. He met the man's glare from behind his sunglasses, his expression a mask of calm indifference. Inside, his adrenaline was surging, every nerve ending tingling with readiness. He was no longer a retired firefighter. He was a sentinel, a guardian standing his post. The man took a step towards him, away from the dumpster. "I'm talking to you. Move your bike." "You're in the way." Coltrane slowly, deliberately, reached forward and turned the key in the ignition. The Harley's engine exploded into life, a deep, guttural roar that shattered the afternoon's false peace. The sound echoed off the low-slung roof of the motel, a thunderclap of defiance. The ground beneath them seemed to vibrate with the raw power of the machine. The man flinched back, startled by the sudden, violent noise. This was the point of no return. The confrontation had begun. "I said, move it," the man screamed, his face contorting into a mask of rage. He started walking towards Coltrane, his pace quick and aggressive. He was trying to intimidate, to project an authority he clearly didn't possess. Coltrane ignored him. His focus was on the dumpster. He raised his left hand from the handlebar and placed his thumb on the horn button. He looked past the advancing man, his eyes searching for the boy. He saw a flash of movement, a small face peering around the edge again. Their eyes met one more time. "Now!" Coltrane pressed the button twice. Honk! Honk! The sound was sharp, loud, and clear. It was not an angry blast, but a signal. A call. An answer. For the boy named Leo, it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. It was the sound of hope. It was the sound of rescue. He didn't hesitate. He burst from behind the dumpster like a sprinter from the starting blocks. His thin legs pumped furiously, kicking up dust as he ran across the cracked asphalt. He wasn't running aimlessly. He was running with a single-minded purpose. He was running towards the sound. Towards the bike. Towards the giant, silent man who had answered his call. The kidnapper spun around, his face a canvas of shock and fury when he saw the boy making a break for it. "Leo! Get back here!" he shrieked, his voice filled with panic. He abandoned his attempt to intimidate Coltrane and lunged after the boy. But Leo had a head start, and he was fueled by a terror that gave him impossible speed. He dodged the man's outstretched hand, swerving like a running back, his eyes fixed on the sanctuary of the big motorcycle. Coltrane revved the engine again, a rumbling growl that warned the man to stay back. Leo reached the bike and scrambled behind it, huddling down behind the rear wheel, using the massive machine as a shield. He was panting, his small chest heaving, but he was safe. He peered through the spokes of the wheel, his eyes wide. The man skidded to a halt a few feet away, his chest heaving. He glared at Coltrane, his eyes burning with a desperate, cornered animal hatred. "He's my son. You have no right," he spat, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. "A father doesn't make his son look like that," Coltrane said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. barely audible over the idle of the bike. It was the first time he had spoken, and his words hung in the air with the weight of a judge's sentence. Just as the man was about to lunge again, a new sound joined the throbbing of the Harley. It was a familiar sound to Coltrane, the sound of his brotherhood. The roar of more engines, growing louder by the second. 3 more motorcycles swept into the entrance, pulling up to flank Coltrane on either side. It was Styx, Preacher, and Duke, 3 of his closest brothers in the Iron Sentinels. They cut their engines, and the sudden, relative silence was deafening. They didn't say a word. They just sat on their bikes, 3 more leather-clad giants, their faces grim, their presence an unbreakable wall. The kidnapper froze, his eyes darting between the 4 bikers. The odds had just changed dramatically. He was trapped, surrounded. His shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a frantic, desperate fear. He took a half-step back, then another, looking for an escape that didn't exist. And then, another sound pierced the air. A high, thin wail that grew steadily louder. Sirens. Preacher had called 911 the moment he read the code 100 text, relaying the location and the suspicion of a child in danger. The authorities were here. A state trooper's cruiser came into view down the highway, its lights flashing. It slowed and turned into the motel lot, stopping just behind the line of motorcycles. 2 officers got out, their hands on their holstered weapons, their eyes quickly taking in the scene, 4 imposing bikers forming a barrier, a terrified-looking man, and the small boy peeking out from behind the lead motorcycle. Coltrane finally cut his engine. He swung his leg off the bike and stood, turning to face the officers. He held his hands up, palms open, a universal sign of peace. "The man in the tank top," he said, his voice calm and steady. "He has a boy here." The boy signaled for help. "He's behind my bike," the lead officer, a sergeant with a weathered face and calm eyes, nodded. He recognized the situation for what it was. He and his partner moved forward cautiously. "Sir," the sergeant said to the kidnapper, his voice firm but even. "Please place your hands on your head and get on your knees." The man's last ounce of resistance crumbled. He sank to his knees, defeated. As the second officer cuffed him, the sergeant walked over to Coltrane. "You saw him signal for help?" "Yes," Coltrane said. And the fear on his face. "I was a firefighter for 30 years. I know what a scared kid looks like." The sergeant nodded again, a look of understanding and respect in his eyes. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, run a check on this individual. And see if we have any Amber Alerts for a boy named Leo, about 8 years old." While they waited, a female officer arrived in a second cruiser. She had a softer touch. She knelt down a few feet from the bike. "Hey there," she said gently to the boy. "My name is Officer Miller. Are you Leo?" The boy peeked out, his eyes darting from the officer to Coltrane. He nodded hesitantly. "It's okay, Leo. You're safe now," she said, her voice soothing. "Can you come out from behind there?" Leo looked at Coltrane, seeking permission. Coltrane gave him a small, reassuring nod. The boy slowly crawled out from his hiding spot and stood up. He was trembling from head to toe. The sergeant's radio crackled to life. The dispatcher's voice was urgent. "Sergeant, we have a hit. The suspect is wanted in connection with a parental kidnapping out of state. An Amber Alert was issued this morning for Leo Carter, age 8. He was taken from a playground 2 days ago." A wave of relief washed over Coltrane, so potent it almost buckled his knees. He had been right. His instincts had been true. The sergeant looked over at him, his face serious. "You did a good thing here today. A damn good thing." "Thank you." Officer Miller gently wrapped a blanket around Leo's small, shaking shoulders. She gave him a bottle of water, which he drank thirstily. He was still looking at Coltrane, his eyes filled with a kind of awestruck reverence. He took a hesitant step towards the big biker. He stopped in front of him and looked up, his small voice barely a whisper. "You honked." Coltrane's throat felt thick with emotion. He crouched down, the leather of his pants groaning in protest. He was now eye level with the boy. He reached out and placed a heavy, gloved hand on Leo's shoulder. The boy didn't flinch. "I heard you," Coltrane said, his own voice rough. Loud and clear as a single tear traced a clean path through the dirt on Leo's cheek. He leaned forward and, without a word, wrapped his thin arms around Coltrane's massive neck. The big biker froze for a second, surprised, then slowly brought his own arms up, enveloping the small boy in a protective, gentle hug. His brothers, the Iron Sentinels, stood by their bikes, a silent, watchful honor guard. They had seen Coltrane face down fires and stand up to threats, but they had never seen him look more like a hero than he did in that moment, holding a rescued child in the dusty parking lot of a forgotten motel. An hour later, another car screamed into the lot. A man and a woman burst out before it had even come to a complete stop. Leo's parents. Their faces were etched with sleepless anxiety and terror. When Leo saw them, he cried out, "Mom! Dad!" and ran into their arms. The reunion was a chaotic, beautiful explosion of tears and relieved cries, a moment of pure love and gratitude that washed away the ugliness of the day. After giving their statements, the Iron Sentinels prepared to leave. Leo's father, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a gratitude too profound for words, walked over to Coltrane. He grabbed the biker's hand with both of his. "I don't know how to thank you," he choked out. "You saved our son. You saved our whole world." Coltrane just nodded. "Just glad I was here," he said gruffly, uncomfortable with the praise. Before he mounted his bike, Leo ran up to him one last time. He held out a small, folded piece of paper. It was a drawing he had made in the back of the police car, a crayon sketch of a huge motorcycle and a small boy. Above the handlebars, he had drawn 2 musical notes. "For you," he said. "So you don't forget the signal." Coltrane took the drawing carefully, as if it were the most fragile thing in the world. "I won't forget," he promised. "Ride safe, Leo." He tucked the drawing into the inside pocket of his vest, right over his heart. 5 years later, the Sleepy Hollow Motel was gone, bulldozed to make way for a highway expansion. But the events of that day had left an impact that was anything but forgotten. Leo Carter was 13 years old now, a bright, confident kid with a quick smile. The trauma of his ordeal had faded, replaced by a quiet strength and a fierce desire to help others. He was the founder and president of his middle school's Watchful Owls Club, a program he designed himself to teach younger students about awareness and how to signal for help if they ever felt unsafe. He never told his own full story, but he taught them the importance of having a plan, of being seen, and of trusting their instincts. He had turned his darkest memory into a beacon for others. His connection to Marcus Coltrane Thorne had never faded. It had grown into a bond that was deeper than friendship, something closer to family. Marcus was at his baseball games, a silent, reassuring presence in the bleachers. He was there for his middle school graduation. Every year, on the anniversary of the rescue, they met at a diner halfway between their homes. They didn't talk much about that day anymore. They didn't have to. It was the foundation of everything, the unspoken truth that connected a retired firefighter and a teenage boy who had, for a brief, terrifying moment, both been in the right place at the right time. Leo's parents called Marcus his guardian angel. Leo just called him Uncle Marcus. The story had also changed the Iron Sentinels. Inspired by Coltrane's actions, the club had started a new charitable initiative, the Sentinels Watch Foundation. They partnered with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, leveraging their network of riders across the country. They became a mobile army of eyes on the road. They printed posters, shared alerts, and taught truckers, travelers, and other riders what to look for, the subtle signs of a child in distress. The informal 2 honks signal became a legend within the community, a piece of folklore that served as a powerful reminder: listen to the quiet please. Pay attention. On the 5th anniversary, Marcus and Leo sat in their usual booth at the diner. A plate of fries sat between them. Leo was taller now, almost looking Marcus in the eye. He pushed a folded piece of paper across the table, just as he had done all those years ago. Marcus unfolded it. It was a new drawing. This one was more detailed, the work of a budding artist. It showed a line of motorcycles riding down a highway under a starry sky. In the corner, a small owl with wide, watchful eyes perched on a sign that read, "We hear you." Marcus looked at the drawing, then at the young man sitting across from him. He saw not a victim, but a survivor. A leader. A good kid who was going to grow into a great man. He thought about that day, about the heat and the fear and the roar of his engine. He had spent his life responding to sirens, to loud calls for help. But the most important call he ever answered had been a silent one, a desperate signal from a boy he couldn't even hear. It had taught him that the world is full of noise, but the most important messages are often the quietest. You just have to be willing to stop, to look past the surface, and to listen with your heart. He carefully folded the new drawing and tucked it into his vest, right next to the crayon sketch from 5 years before. He smiled, a true, deep smile that reached his pale blue eyes. The fire was out, but the watch was never over. He was a sentinel. And he was still on duty.